Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we synthesize rigorous academic debates so you can cut through the noise and get straight to the essential knowledge. Today, we are wading into, well, a real academic slugfest. It's a point-by-point, highly detailed rebuttal against a widely circulated and, frankly, pretty doom-laden paper about the future of energy. This isn't just a casual disagreement. It feels more like a systematic takedown. The document we're diving into today is titled Comment on Seibert, MK. Rees, WE, Through the Eye of a Needle, an eco-heterodox perspective on the renewable energy transition. Quite a mouthful. Okay, so the original paper, the one getting critiqued here, basically argued that renewable energy technologies, or RE, have numerous collectively fatal problems. Our mission for you today is to unpack why the authors of this comment felt they absolutely had to respond. They explicitly state their goal is to expose and rectify what they see as the original article's non-scientific approach, its biased literature screening, and frankly, its reliance on unsubstantiated personal opinions.
Yeah, and what's really striking from the get-go is the sheer scale of the original claim made by Seibert and Rees, the SR paper, as this comment calls it. They weren't just pointing out challenges or hurdles for technology. No, they rejected technological solutions pretty much entirely, their ultimate prescription for humanity. It was incredibly drastic, massive behavioral change, coupled with, and this is the kicker, reducing the global population down to about 1 billion people.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That's extreme.
It certainly is. And the authors of this comment fundamentally disagree with that whole premise. Now, they do acknowledge that behavioral changes are absolutely vital. Nobody's denying that. But they argue that, denigrating the proven measurable potential of technology as a way to advance that change, that's actually self-defeating. It kind of stands in the way of the rapid decarbonization we desperately need. They see it as an unnecessary academic roadblock, really.
Right. So let's start digging into the critique itself. How do they dismantle the arguments? The rebuttal kicks off by calling out the terminology used. Specifically, the systematic use of the phrase so-called renewables throughout the original SR paper. Now, that might sound like just semantics, but why did the rebuttal authors feel that was so scientifically misleading?
Well, because it implies the resource base itself isn't renewable, which is fundamentally wrong for things like solar. I mean, look, the rate the sun consumes hydrogen is negligible on any human timescale. Solar energy is, for all intents and purposes, entirely renewable. But maybe more importantly, the comment authors emphasize that most materials used in the actual panels, the physical stuff, are recoverable at the end of their service life. So over time, the system can approach a circular economy. This makes photovoltaic electricity effectively renewable to a very, very large degree. Calling it so-called, it really just seems like a rhetorical trick designed to sow doubt right from the start.
And that doubt didn't stop with the name-calling, did it? The comment identifies selective citation, or what we often call cherry-picking evidence, as perhaps the single biggest flaw.
Exactly. That's really the core of their critique. The original SR paper, they argue, cited only the extreme sources, the ones that exaggerated potential negative impacts. And while doing that, they systematically ignored literally hundreds of peer-reviewed articles that do acknowledge challenges, yes, but also document concrete quantitative solutions.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, they provide a great one. The SR paper cited sources talking about really serious issues like ethical mining, forced labor in Africa, even mafia-like operations. Terrible stuff. But the comment authors point out SR apparently stopped reading before they got to the conclusions of those very same sources. Yes. For instance, one paper SR cited detailed some alarming cases of exploitation, but its final paragraph concluded, and this is a quote, that ample opportunities exist to make the low-carbon world more pluralistic, demographic, and just. Quote, so SR used the negative findings to bolster their doom narrative, but just discarded the constructive, solution-oriented part offered in the same breath.
Wow. So it wasn't just using old data. They were actively ignoring solutions presented within their own cited bibliography. That's quite something.
It speaks directly to that biased literature screening the comment authors were talking about.
Okay, that brings us to section 2. The truly staggering claims around financial feasibility and scale. This were the original paper threw out numbers designed to just stop you in your tracks. They claimed, for instance, that a global solar program would have totaled roughly $252 trillion a decade ago. And they made sure to note that this figure was 13 times the entire U.S. GDP at the time. That kind of number makes the whole idea sound utterly impossible, doesn't it?
Completely impossible. And as this comment shows, utterly wrong. When the authors of this study fact-checked those trillions, they found something pretty damning. The SR paper's references for that astronomical figure, they were unsubstantiated, non-peer-reviewed reports from known climate change deniers.
Wait, hang on. Non-peer-reviewed reports from climate change deniers. For a cost, estimate that central to their argument.
That's what the comment states, yes. And the numbers just don't hold up against credible sources.
So how far off were they?
Massively. If you look at the verifiable counter-estimates cited in the study, the difference is just night and day. The U.S. Department of Energy Sunshot studies, they forecast the transition will cost less than $1 trillion U.S. total.
Less than 1 trillion versus 252 trillion.
Exactly. And even other major studies like a widely publicized Princeton report estimated about $2.5 trillion over the next decade, and that's for all sectors involved in the transition. Even that higher, more comprehensive figure is still roughly 100 times smaller than the number Seibert and Rees used.
A factor of 100? That's not a rounding error. That's, well, you said it, academic negligence almost.
It really undermines the credibility of their financial analysis, according to this comment. The original claim was, as the comment implies, absurdly distorted.
Okay, and just when you think the cost claims were the worst of it, they found another fundamental error, didn't they? This time in how SR calculated the required rate of construction. The SR article claimed the U.S. would need to, get this, quadruple its last annual construction of wind turbines every year, and triple solar PV construction for the next 15 years indefinitely. That sounds unsustainable on its face.
It does, but it's based on a faulty premise. This is where the comment makes a huge correction regarding the lifespan of these systems, and it completely changes the math. The comment points out that the reports SR actually cited specify minimum expected lifespans for solar panels of 25 to 30 years.
25 to 30. Not 15.
Correct. Modern modules are typically guaranteed for 25 years and often expected to function even longer than 30 years, not the 15 years implied by the SR paper's calculation.
And the difference between a 15-year life and a 30-year life?
It means you only need half the replacement rate over the long term. Miscalculating the lifespan so drastically inflates the supposed indefinite construction rate needed. It basically makes the challenge seem twice as hard as it actually is.
That seems like a pretty basic error to make.
It does seem fundamental, yes.
Okay, that flows nicely into Section 3, where the comment tackles physical constraints specifically, the concerns raised by SR about depleting critical metals and minerals, things like lithium, neodymium, essential for RE tech. SR framed this as basically a dead end for renewables.
Right, another fatal flaw. But what's fascinating here is how the comment reframes the issue entirely. They argue that material availability isn't some immovable barrier. It's an active, ongoing area of research where people are finding constructive solutions right now. And they back this up by citing multiple established bodies. You know, the European Commission, the U.S. Department of Energy, the USGS, all of whom are actively addressing these potential criticalities in practical, constructive ways.
So it's a known challenge being actively managed, not an ignored catastrophe waiting to happen.
Precisely. And they give specific data-driven examples to dismantle that fatality argument. For instance, tellurium, that's key for certain thin film PVs like CDTT. They show its availability is sufficient to support at least 4 to 5 times the current production capacity. Indium, used in CIGS PV, explicitly not a limiting factor for large-scale production, according to cited studies.
What about silver? That's often mentioned.
Good point. Silver in traditional silicon PV has raised concerns, but the comment points out that it's not actually essential and is already being progressively replaced by more abundant metals like copper. They show that these material challenges are consistently being tackled through market forces, substitution research, and efficiency improvements. It's not a static problem.
All right, then there's the classic argument against solar, energy return on investment, or EROI. The SR paper claims solar PV has an EROI that's too low to power modern civilization. Basically, that it takes almost as much energy to make a panel as it ever produces.
Ah, yes. The EROI argument. It's a common one, but often relies on outdated information. The rebuttal delivers a pretty thorough EROI reality check here. They note that some of the data SR relied on was decades old from the early days of PV. Modern peer-reviewed life cycle assessments, the standard way to calculate this, show that the energy payback time, or EPBT, that's the time it takes for a system to generate the energy equivalent to what was used to make it. Well, it's improved dramatically.
How long does it take now?
It now takes only about zero point 0.5 to 1.5 years for a PV system to pay back its primary energy investment. The exact time depends on how much sunlight it gets,
It's a
obviously.
year to maybe a year and a half. That's a massive improvement from the old days. What does that mean for the overall EROI ratio?
It translates to EROI values typically ranging between 20 and 50, sometimes even higher for optimal locations. That's well within the range considered viable for powering society. And here's a really key analytical point the comment authors stress. It's fundamentally flawed to just take a minimum EROI threshold from the fossil fuel era and apply it directly to a future based on massive electrification.
Why is that flawed?
Because moving to electricity directly for end uses like electric vehicles or heat pumps effectively sidesteps many of the huge inherent energy inefficiencies that plague the entire fossil fuel supply chain. Think about all the energy lost just burning fuel in engines due to basic physics, the Carnot limits.
Right, like the heat wasted in the car engine.
Exactly, or losses in refining and transportation.
Mm.
In a highly electrified world powered by renewables, a lot of those intermediate losses just disappear. So the actual minimum EROI needed at the source to sustain society could potentially be significantly lower than traditional estimates based on fossil fuels. It's comparing apples and oranges if you don't account for that systemic shift.
That's a really important nuance. Okay, let's move to section 4, focusing on manufacturing, recycling, and storage logistics. A common criticism, the fossil fuel manufacturing myth, goes something like this. RE manufacturing needs high heat and lots of energy, which currently comes from fossil fuels. So aren't renewables just fossil fuels in disguise?
Yeah, it's an argument you hear a lot. This study offers two simple but pretty devastating counterpoints. First, even with the current manufacturing mix, the overall amount of fossil fuel used per unit of energy delivered over the lifetime of a solar panel or wind turbine is orders of magnitude lower than just burning fossil fuels directly. So the dependency is minimal to begin with, relatively speaking.
Okay, so it's already much better, even now.
Much better. But second, and this is the crucial part for the future, the overwhelming majority, they estimate around 80 to 90% of the energy inputs into manufacturing solar PV comes in the form of electricity.
So if that electricity comes from solar.
Precisely. Solar energy could easily become self-sustaining. You use clean solar power to manufacture more solar panels. It completely breaks the reliance on fossil fuels for manufacturing in the long run. It's a virtuous cycle.
Got it. Now, what about the end of life? The SR paper asserted that waste streams are basically ignored and that recycling is just some non-existent silver bullet fantasy.
That's another strong claim that, according to this comment, simply doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The rebuttal notes that recycling of PV modules in Europe is already mandated by law, the WEEE directive. It's not optional.
So the framework exists.
The legal framework exists in major markets, yes. And the technologies for recycling also exist. They mention methods, both pyrometallurgical, which uses heat, and newer, more efficient hydrometallurgical methods using chemistry, have been demonstrated successfully for all commercial PV types. The real problem isn't the lack of technology, it's scale. The industry is still relatively young, so the volume of panels reaching end of life is only now starting to ramp up.
So the capacity needs to be built out.
Exactly. The comment gives an example. Solar glass recycling capacity needs to basically double by 2030 to meet projected needs. So the industry is actively building that capacity, but saying the technology is non-existent or ignored is just inaccurate based on the evidence presented here.
Okay, final point from SR that this comment tackles. Battery storage. This is crucial for handling the intermittency of wind and solar, right? SR estimated that storing just 24 hours of U.S. electricity generation in lithium batteries would cost a mind-boggling $11.9 trillion. Another one of those paralyzing figures.
And based on, again, a completely flawed assumption, according to this comment, the idea that you need to store 24 hours of total national electricity generation is unsubstantiated. It ignores how a real-world grid works. It assumes no resource complementarity. Wind often blows when the sun isn't shining and vice versa. It also assumes no benefit from grid interconnection sharing power across regions. When the comment authors looked at realistic grid modeling studies for a 100% RE North American system in 2050, they found the necessary battery capacity is equivalent to only about 1 hour of average storage.
1 hour average, not 24 hours.
Just 1,809 GWh of capacity is the figure they cite. That massive reduction comes from integrating different renewables, hydropower, demand response, and having a robust interconnected grid. You don't need to store everything for 24 hours everywhere.
That drastically changes the cost calculation, I imagine.
Completely. And they also correct the SR paper on battery lifetimes. SR lowballed them at 5 to 15 years. But realistic projections and actual test data suggest lifetimes closer to 20 years, maybe 6,000 charge cycles, and potentially even up to 30 years for grid-scale batteries in the future. Longer life means lower lifetime cost.
So across the board, costs, materials, ARY, manufacturing, recycling, storage. This comment systematically refutes the fatal flaws alleged by the original paper. Wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway from this systematic point-by-point rebuttal? Well, the conclusion of the comment itself is pretty clear. They reiterate their primary finding. The original Seibert Rees paper presented a deeply distorted perspective. They achieved this through selective citation, reliance on poor or outdated sources, and ultimately making its analysis fundamentally flawed in design.
Absolutely. But I think the most crucial conclusion, the one that really defines the broader debate for everyone, is this. The pertinent question isn't whether renewable energy technologies are absolutely perfect or if they have zero environmental impacts. No technology is perfect. The real question, the authors stress, is whether they will be better than the existing system. And they emphasize that our current fossil fuel-dominated energy system is, in their words, wholly unsustainable and unviable even in the short run. So the focus needs to be on implementing the best available solutions and improving them, not just magnifying potential problems as an excuse for inaction.
That really puts it in perspective. And maybe that's the real challenge for listeners, for you, thinking about this. Perhaps the debate really needs to shift entirely, not can renewables work, because the data presented in this comment overwhelmingly suggests they can and are. But rather, what is the true financial, environmental, and social cost of not aggressively pursuing these solutions? What's the cost of delay in defossilizing the global economy? That's a much more urgent and frankly more constructive question to mull over. And that was our deep dive into the extensive research and critique presented in the comment on Seibert, MK, Rees, WE, Through the Eye of a Needle, an eco-heterodox perspective on the renewable energy transition.